been a journey. For those of you who have been with us, we started this weekly sessions when the pandemic hit us, and every week we chose to bring you something encouraging, something to enlighten you on how the impacts of COVID was affecting women. And it was so amazing for us that so many of you jumped on and stuck with us week on week. And like many, we too got quite tired and we needed to take breaks. And so we came to you every second week, and we still brought you content that we thought was really relevant to you. But more than it being relevant to you, our community was asking us for the kind of topics that we were talking about. With that, this week is no different. We come to you in the period when it's 10 days of activism against gender-based violence. And oh, sorry, my husband is walking past. And today what we're talking about is gender-based violence in the workplace, something we don't always talk about, some things we don't always know about. And so today that's what we're diving into, and we know we're going to shed a lot of light on it for a lot of you. So we're continuing with our campaign, and a lot of you have joined us on our campaign, which is Dare to See Us. So it's hashtag Dare to See Us. And before I dive into what our hashtags are, I'm going to quickly do some etiquette around Zoom. So I know we all have been Zooming and Microsoft Teams, and we've been doing all kinds of virtual meetings. But just so that today is quite fluid, we're going to ask, if you aren't speaking, if you're just listening in, we're going to ask that you would put yourself on mute, and if you would like to put your video off as well, so that will increase our bandwidth. And then we'd like for you to use the chat. So the chat is there for you to communicate with us. We have two requests in the chat. If you have a question, we'd like you to start the question with a question mark. So start with a question mark, and then we'll know that's a question we need to handle. And then make sure, if it's for someone in the panel, that you would kindly tell us who you're directing that question to. And then if you have just a comment, then use an exclamation mark, and we'll know that that is an exclamation or just a comment that you're making. So that's just for the chat. If you're going to use the chat, then go ahead and do that with us. Then if you'd like to ask a question face to face, so you want to speak to the panel and show your face, raise your hand, and then somebody will come and give you the chance to ask your question to the panelists. We're looking forward to engaging with you in the Zoom chat. So go ahead and use that. And then I would like you to know that whilst we go through today, we have a survey that we're doing as well. And that survey is on Mentimeter. So if you've used Menti before, you'll know how this works. But it's menti.com. So Mentimeter is on menti.com. And I'm going to give you the code. It's going to be in the chat in a moment. And as we finish each session, we're going to ask for you to engage us on that survey. So I will give you more instruction around it. But if you can go to menti.com in the meantime, if you have your phone close by, you will use your phone as your secondary device if you're using your computer as your Zoom link, or you could open a separate page and go to menti.com, and then you're going to put in a code, and I'm going to give you that code soon. And once you put in that code, you'll be able to engage us on that survey. So now that I have all of the administration out of the way, I hope I've covered most of it. I wanted to remind you that we run a competition every time we have these sessions, and it's for anyone who's most active on social media. So the hashtags you're using is hashtag Dare to See Us. So it's Dare and the number 2, See Us. And the next one is hashtag Let's Talk. The third one we're using is hashtag Reimagine, and it's the one we've been using throughout this year. And finally, don't forget that you can do @Womaniko, and that's how we'll be able to find you as well. So for those of you who are active on social media and you want to bring attention to this conversation, then please use those hashtags, and then you'll win a prize at the end of today. With that, I am going to tell you about a methodology that we use at Womaniko. If you've stuck with us, and many of you, I see so many familiar faces in the room, you will know that storytelling is so important to the work we do at Womaniko. Telling stories, it is the bedrock of our work. And stories are amazing ways in which we get to connect with you. And so stories give us a new meaning to our present circumstances that we find ourselves in. It also gives us the opportunity to paint a new picture. So to reframe our context, to reframe what we're feeling or what we're experiencing. And the stories we tell about ourselves, or the stories that we tell collectively around our experiences, really helps us to do a few things. It helps us to connect, one, it helps us to find people with shared values, value alignment, and three, it also helps us to frame our stories. And what's amazing for us in you sharing your story, us sharing our stories with you, and being able to frame it, is that we're able to give our call to actions voice. We're able to collectively give voice to those stories. And so in our sharing stories, it becomes so critical that one, we give you the space to do so, and two, we create the space to bring others to share their story. And today is no different. If you've been at a session before, then you know this. You know that we bring women who have a story to share around a specific thing. And today it's about gender based violence in the workplace or in the world of work. And today we have five amazing sisters who have come alongside us and said, we're willing to share our story, our perspective. And so, with that, I'm not going to waste too much time, but I'm going to dive straight in and hand over to Ricky, who's going to set the scene and then take us through what the next couple of hours or the next 2 hours looks like. Ricky, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and welcome everybody. So you also know that when we do these Dare to See Us sessions, we also bring in a bit of poetry to help us think about the issues that we're dealing with, and to help us express some of the issues that need to be expressed. So tonight we have some video poetry for you from a very exciting young poet. Her name is Sipokazi Jonas, and she's a writer, a performer, a poet, and a theater maker. She's well known for the choreo poem, We Are Dying Here, which is a poem about gender-based violence in the South African context. And this year, she turned this choreo poem into a movie. And this movie, this film, is available to be used in different contexts to facilitate conversations about gender-based. She made this film because she wants organizations, communities, workplaces to use this film to help us think about what is gender-based violence, to help us think about its manifestations, to help us think about what the experiences are like. Because as Cheryl has said, while we know the benefits of storytelling, indeed, it's still very difficult to talk about the personal and painful experiences of gender-based violence. So Sipokazi was kind enough to let us use her poetry, and we're going to start with an excerpt from the poem We Are Dying Here. And at the end of the session, we will share with you her details so that if you want to be using this poem in your workplace, in your community, in your organization, you can get in touch with her and find out how to have access to this film. So Timbela, the sound is not coming through. So for those of you who are not picking up a lot of sound, you can read the subtitles. Wow. So it's a very powerful poem. I am really sad that we were not able to sort out the sound, but we do have the social media, and we will put up a slide that shows where you can see the poem. It's available on YouTube, this clip that we played for you, and it is also available on Sipokazi's Instagram and Twitter. For those of you who are able to catch some of the phrases, she talks extensively about, well, the poem talks to the experience of gender-based violence in the workplace, right? She talks about what is happening in the boardroom and what is happening at the copy machine in a workplace. And what we do know about gender-based violence in the workplace is very little. There hasn't been a lot in the way of studying about gender-based violence, but we do know that it is important to consider because it costs the workplace. It costs the workplace in terms of hours. It has a high cost to business and to the workplace when gender-based violence is happening. So there has been a business case built for why we have to address gender-based violence. In the context of 2020, what we know about the COVID pandemic is that there was a significant shadow pandemic of gender-based violence. And we have come into an age where the recognition that gender-based violence is not just a social issue that happens somewhere in a community, in a house, in the dark, away from the light. More and more, because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns, the shadow pandemic came to light. What we came to see is that when the workplace begins to become the home, gender-based violence is recognized as affecting what is happening in our workplaces. So the questions that we have to ask ourselves now is, what is to be done? I've got a few stats for you. As you know, I'm the stats girl. Is a study done in 2018. It was a rapid survey, showed that 30% of women reported unwanted sexual advances in the workplace. 15% of these types of sexual harassment were verbal. 38% were unwanted touching. 42% was looks, lustful looks. 32% was messages of a sexual nature. And yet only 16% reported the cases, be it to an authority or to HR. Where people witness sexual harassment, only 34% had the courage to intervene, or less than that, 31% were able to report it. So here is what we know is happening with gender-based violence in the workplace context, but that's happening in the context of a national pandemic, a national plague of gender-based violence. I think official stats where there were 9,000 cases reported just between July and September this year, 9,000 cases of rape. We know that domestic violence cases increased by 500% when the lockdown started. So when we're seeking to understand what is happening with gender-based violence in the workplace, we have to understand it in the social context. If we want to change behavior in the workplace, we have to change behavior in society, right? We can't be saying that you need to be respectful of your colleagues and not reinforcing that with the respect that you show in your home and in your communities. A perpetrator in a community is still going to a place of work where they may be following the rules. So when we talk about gender-based violence, what we would like to present to you as Womaniko, and what we would like you to think about as we're listening to the amazing speakers we'll be listening to today, is that what's happening in workplaces is no different from what's happening in society. And if we're going to talk about the world of work, it means it's not just, it doesn't start when I enter my office. The world of work is all about the safety of my travel to the place where I work. The world of work is our homes where there are domestic workers. The world of work is informal spaces like the streets and the roads where the informal economy is happening. So the world of work has expanded, and in expanding, the responsibility for people who are employers is now much bigger. With this, I want us, I'm going to hand over to Sto, who's going to take us into an amazing panel that is going to explore the dimensions of these issues that I have just mentioned. Not only the manifestations of gender-based violence in the workplace, but what can be done about it? How do we understand what is possible? And most importantly for us in the Womaniko space, what you can do as a woman in the world of work, what you can do for yourself and what you can do for others. And at the end of the day, we're going to be talking, like we always do, about what is our call to action. So Sto, over to you.
Thank you, Ricky, and welcome to everyone this evening. As we are gathered today, I think I'd like to also remind everyone that today it's the last day of the 16 days of activism, but internationally, it's also the day where we celebrate International Human Rights Day. And for me, that becomes very significant because any gender-based violence is actually a human rights violation. So I welcome you, and I hope we can walk on this journey where we have very good speakers who are leaders in their own different fields and who are going to share with us their own journeys when it comes to issues of gender-based violence in the workplace, how they see it, and how interacted with it, and also give us also solutions that could maybe help us going forward on our own journeys in the world of work. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mpiwa Mangwiro Tsanga, who is a human rights lawyer and a regional specialist at Sonke Gender Justice, who will discuss the issues related to migrant women and race. It's a pleasure to also welcome Sandile Ndelu, a South African Black lesbian, a South African Black trans feminist writer, speaker, and lawyer who will discuss issues related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and youth. And then Jabulile, who is a young woman and an employee of Womaniko, who will speak to us about her own experience as an intern in one of the leading companies that she worked for in South Africa. And we also have Nishani Ford, who will bring to us almost a global view of gender-based violence in the workplace, and also sharing, because she is a global advocate for safer spaces of work, and she's a TED Talk speaker who will focus on what policies and practices options do we have in the workplace, both from an employee and an employer side, and what could be those policies that we put in place to enable the environment. And finally, we also have Commissioner Tabea Kabinde, who is an expert on her own, because she comes from a long history working in the diversity, inclusion, and transformation space. And she's currently the chairperson of the Commission for Employment Equity. She will also help us understand the new guidelines that have been put in place that are going to complement the upcoming convention C190 of the International Labour Organization, which then comes to extend the world of work. As Ricky had earlier mentioned, that the world of work is changing and it's extending beyond just the office. So as a way of going into this discussion, I like to welcome on board Mpiwa to start conversing with us, and you can have your mic on and your video on. Thank you.
Thank you, Sixolile, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for this opportunity to come and discuss such an important issue. Apologies, let me just deal with a bit of the noise in my background. Baby, do you mind going to speak in another room, because we can hear you here? Apologies about that. So coming back to address the issue of, I'm glad that Ricky started off by really painting the picture about the reality of gender-based violence in the workspace, because there's normally been the tendency to think that gender-based violence is something that happens elsewhere, but it's also, gender-based violence is so perverse that it has followed us in every facet of our lives and in every space of our lives, including the workspace. And some of the statistics that you were sharing about the workspace, like 30% of women having experienced violence, is also true of reflective of society, that in general, globally, that's the statistics that women have. The 1 in 3 women have experienced gender-based violence. And what I've seen in my experience with gender-based violence in the workspace is that it normally takes the form of sexual violations and sexual harassment. And it's normally perpetrated in a relationship where there's an unequal balance of power. You see that it's someone that you are reporting to, it's someone that wields authority and influence, and then they abuse that authority and influence and begin to abuse, to violate someone, to abuse someone. And I was just going to think, I'm just going to share from my experiences with the work that I've been doing in terms of helping women address in terms of gender-based violence. And I remember remember when I was working for this organization, there's one woman who once came, and this was a case that involved, this was someone who was working in the police force, and they had been violated, they'd been sexually harassed. In fact, they'd even been raped. It started off as sexual harassment until it culminated in a rape, because she was scared of reporting. Only when she had been raped did she then come out and say, this is what has been happening and I've been violated. As the full power of patriarchy coming out to victimize a woman who had been violated. In the end, there were allegations that were thrown against her of incompetence. Stories were created against her, accusing her of things that she had not done. And the work environment was made so hostile that even as we were going through one hurdle, legal battle against another, and she got to a point where she was like, I can't take it anymore. This work environment is taking its toll on me psychologically, mentally. I saw her only crime was that she had come out and reported that her boss had been victimizing her, and the authorities and powers that be seems to be taking in the side of the boss, standing with the boss, to the point where she eventually then said, I would rather resign and leave this workspace than continue to be here, because I am now on all sorts of medications. I am abused and violated every other day. I am held before one form of hearing after another, only because of what I reported. So this explains why women are not comfortable to report. And then I want to then paint this picture to bring it to the reality of migrants or non-nationals, that there's already vulnerability that comes with being a Black woman in a workspace, because we're dealing with power dynamics, we're dealing with an equal power here. And when then you bring in the dimension of being a migrant, first of all, let me just contextualize that the realities in South Africa, being a migrant feels like you're a criminal. You are just criminalized for not having been born in South Africa. You are treated like your presence in this country is you are treated like it's a crime. So when you then encounter instances of being victimized, when you then encounter already you are coming from a point where you are treated like a second, I don't know, even a third class citizen, maybe, because you are treated like a second class or third class citizen. So imagine how it becomes when now you have been violated by a national and you have to take on this person and report them. So I have also, I'll share from the work that I did. And I dealt with a number of cases of women who would come to the organization where I used to be, seeking for counseling, and maybe sometimes it would then end up, because the counselors would pick the legal issues, and sometimes they would call me saying, Mpiwa, there are legal issues here. Then when you come and you say, okay, then they'll be like, look, I'm not prepared to report because this person is a national and I'm not a national. And if I go, and they are taunting that, they're always taunting that to me, that if I think I can go to the police, I should go to the police and I'll see what they will do to me. The police will pick a non-national, a foreigner over a citizen. So there's that extra layer of being treated unfairly by virtue of you being not from South Africa, where you are already being criminalized for being in this country. And yet migration is a reality, is part of our reality every day. Migration, people migrate for different reasons. And one of the places where I realized how prevalent gender-based violence was where it deals with domestic work. There are a number of people that came and they were domestic workers, and obviously some of them did not have the necessary documentation to be in the country, and their employers would know that. And I remember particularly an incident of this young lady who was a nanny, and she was raped multiple times by the employer, and she was like, the employer is touting it to me that I can go and do what I want, but the reality is if I go to the police, I'm the one who's going to be arrested for being in this country illegally, he's not going to be arrested for having raped me. And I remember then us taking up the case and saying, no, these are two separate issues. The issue of your legality is one issue. The issue of your being raped is another issue, and your employer should be held accountable for the issues that for the crime that is committed. And I remember the attitude we got, because I went with her to the police, and the police, the moment they picked that this was a non-national versus a citizen, the conversation was already shifting, and they now wanted to talk about, how did you get here? What do you want in this country? What, and all sorts of things that made that. So I'm just saying this to make you understand that while already gender-based violence is something that women deal with every other day, even in the workspace, then add on the fact that if you are a non-national, you are already invisible. You're already treated as if you don't have any rights in this country. You have no right to exist and be in this country. The law, the justice system that is also meant to be there to aid when you have been violated, to see that justice has been served, unfortunately, is also the same system that entrenches that system of that impunity that perpetrators, people who violate non-nationals, then get to receive. So these are some of the challenges. These are some of the violence that is rampant, particularly when we're talking domestic work, when we are talking in the space, or even not in the domestic work, in any other workspace. I will just lastly on this point allude to one incident as well. When I was working for one organization, and there's a leader, one of these political leaders, had said a lot of vitriol on social media about foreign nationals and them being the scum of the earth and all those things. And people in the office started circulating these messages, and everyone seemed to be saying, oh no, but I haven't seen it, please forward it to me. Yeah, this is why he's telling the truth. You know, we need leaders like him who's going to tell this truth. You know, they should tell these dogs and this, you know, is fair, but that we don't want them in their country. And you're sitting there, you're a foreigner in a human rights organization, and you're thinking, but this is the space where we are supposed to be dealing with human rights, dealing with abuses. And here I have peers that I work with sharing a message that is saying a whole lot of vitriol and calling people, is fair, they tell these dogs they need to go. And I started thinking, so what do they look at me and see if they are going to be comfortable to say this in my space? What, and yet at the end, we go out and say we're doing human rights, we're challenging xenophobia, gender-based violence, and all those things. So for me, it was, I then began to even ask myself to say, if I were to be violated in this workspace, do I even have a right? Do I even have an avenue? Do I even have the space to go and express myself? Is there any right to justice in this space? So those are some of the issues that I talk about. And then I'm not sure what's going. There's a mic that needs to be muted. Someone needs to mute their mic.
Maybe the host
No,
can.
I don't have to mute my mic, bro. This is my time to shine. And I'm gonna be teaching you everything that you need to know. Okay,
Yo,
everyone, back to what we were
Kelly.
saying.
Yeah.
All right, raise of
We are
hands.
being
Who in here has
bombed.
had sexual intercourse at least one
We
time in
are
their
being
lifetime?
bombed. Can we leave this chat room?
Yo, why does fucking this Indian bitch look so mad with her big ass forehead?
We are being bombed. Can we leave?
Yo, there's two Indian bitches with big ass foreheads. One looks like an ape.
All right, everyone, back to what we were saying. So
Host,
raise of
can you
hands.
kick these people out, please?
Hello.
We are still here. You can continue.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just summing up that to say there's an extra layer of vulnerability that comes, that intersects with being a Black migrant woman. You are, and you have limited recourse to justice. And I shared some of those experiences that left me also questioning if I could also confidently say, in the event that I've been violated, can I really access justice and be confident that I will get it? And the next question that I was supposed to deal with is the issue of the new dynamic that that COVID-19 posed. And to say that, COVID-19 posed a new dynamic, or the new ways of working that we talked about, where we saw our personal and professional lives converge in a very direct way when we had to go on lockdown and start working from home. And so the reality is the fault lines around the burden of care became so visible. I think we are being bombed again. The burden of care became so visible, the fault lines around who does care work. I remember I had just given birth when we went into lockdown. I had a preemie baby, and then now you are just going back to work from maternity leave. So you are taking your work and bringing it home, and then when you're now home, you have to juggle this role of being a new mother and work and all those things. And I was sitting and trying to imagine it, that there are some people who are already victims of gender-based violence in the home space. They're already, we know that a GBV happens both in the private and in the public space. So people have been victimized and abused in their homes. And when lockdown came, we had to move into the homes. People became locked down with their abusers. That meant that this person is now living with their abuser, and there isn't even that space, that used to be there where you go to work and you be away from each other. But people are now in the same room and continuing with being abused. And this time it was even worse because there was limited recourse to justice, because we were on lockdown. People could not move. Movement was restricted, and with that, some abusers actually knew that this person cannot do much because they are restricted in movement, and they perpetrated their violence knowing that even the services that are available were limited then, particularly when we're still in the hardcore lockdowns. And even as the easing has been going on, many people have still remained working from home. Many women have had to continue juggling, having to do the work, show up for the work 9 to 5, and at the same time be able to take care of their kids, juggle taking care of their kids, bearing in mind they've taken their work and brought it into their kids' space. But now they have to see how they manage kids so that they do not interfere with their work. And who has had to bear that burden the most? It's been the women. And men rarely have had to deal with that. Men, they will just go into their office or close themselves behind the closed door and do their work. But women, you have to be the one who has to balance that. And it has reinforced those fault lines that when we're saying that the burden of care, it has brought emotional fatigue. People have had to go mentally. A lot of people have had issues with their mental well-being and wellness because of some of these challenges that COVID has presented. And also, just to talk about the last two, to say, which was saying that what are some of the considerations that need to be taken into place when you're talking about issues of gender-based violence in the context of nationality, race. And I think what is important is, as I have said, that it's when considering prevention of gender-based violence and protection, the intersectionalities of race and nationality come into that like I've already highlighted the challenges, or the double-edged sword of vulnerability when you have to wear the extra burden of being a migrant. So there's need to understand that there are such challenges, and to take measures to ensure that people are protected even in such instances. Like I have said, that even when someone is a non-national, and whether they are legal or not legal, the law there should be mechanisms that are not only on paper, but that are also implemented to ensure that people get the protection, understanding that there is vulnerability that comes with being a migrant. You have left your own support systems, your own safety net, your own people, and you're coming to start a new script, and already you don't have that external support and advantage that other people normally have. And there's also the gendered nature of migration. Women often bear the brunt of the effects of migration. Even when they're looking for opportunities, they are the ones who are compelled or who find themselves cornered to be sexually harassed and sexually abused, for them to get in exchange for job and such favors. So we just need to ensure that there are enough protective mechanisms. And finally, if you are in a situation where you could be violated, I think the best thing to do is to record everything as much as possible, so that should express your discomfort, express your disagreement with certain treatment in the workplace, with certain microaggressions that are tantamount to sexual harassment and abuse, and record everything, because in many instances, as when we report as women, it becomes your word against his word, and more often he wields more power than you, and he can be listened to. But if there is evidence, that can help. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we just experienced a form of violence for all of us, because that was violence that we did not actually want to be part of. And I will not apologize on behalf of people that I don't even know. But what is first and foremost and critical is that Mpiwa has shared her experience, and we want to also hear the experience of the participants and people of this call. So can you also look out for Menti, where we'll be asking you various questions so that you can interact, because the questions are actually parallel to what these panelists are talking about, so that we hear your own views on how your workplace is all about. This is the connection that we are going to use, and you go on www.menti.com, and that is our code, and the question will come up right now that we can engage with. And then once that question has come up, we'll then pick our response to it, and then we move on to the next speaker. This will be almost coming up every time a speaker finishes, and it's our way of us being able to interact and ensure that we are all in this conversation together. So, Cheryl?
Yes, thank you, Score. So there's only 2 people currently in the Menti survey, so we're just going to give you a few minutes. So if you can get into your internet browsers, if you could use your phone, if you're using your computer on Zoom right now, you can use your phone to do this. Go to www.menti.com, and then they're going to ask you for a code, and you can put in the code that's on the screen. It's 5570736. And as soon as we have a fair number of people in there, I'll move the slide and we can do the first few survey questions. But I'm just waiting for a few people to get in. So at the moment, we just have 3 of you that have joined us, and there's about 30 of us in the room. So it'll be great if more of us could get on.
This survey will also help all of us to be able to be part of the conversation, so that at the end of the day, we also see how you are responding to what we are hearing from the speakers. And also it will also help us frame the open panel discussion, and also help us now to start also putting together what could be the call for action in relation to what we want to see and what we want to experience in the world of work, especially when it comes to the addressing of issues of gender-based violence. Cheryl, how is it going?
We have 5, we have 6. We have 6 people in the room. I'm going to move
Maybe you could run the first one, and then we continue. People will get the hang of it once they see. It's interesting, as you can see. We get to choose. Does your workplace have a safe spaces to talk about women's issues, including gender-based violence? As you can see, we're already seeing that out of the 6 that have answered, 80% are saying yes, only 20% are saying no. So if we were to put it across to everyone who's here, maybe that's the answer, maybe that's not. But this is how Menti is going to be part of our conversation throughout this panel discussion and conversation today, because we also want to hear your story, where you are. Cheryl had said, our ways of working here for this campaign is around us telling our stories and hearing each other's stories so that we can learn from them as well. So this is also another way of us doing that. The numbers are actually going up and down now. We're sitting at 67 and 33. And how long do you have, Cheryl, to run this one?
We have we can hold on for just a few more seconds, and then I'm going to move to the next question. But it would be great if you look at the top of the screen, the link is there. So it's menti.com, and the code is always there. So as soon as you manage to get on, it will be great. And then I'll move to the next slide. We're going to do a couple before we get the next speaker on.
But if
So can I move to I'll move to the next one.
If we look at what Ulrike said earlier on around your company recognized GBV as a social pandemic, and you can pick from 5 responses. Are they seeing it as a marketing statement during 16 days of activism? Are they seeing it through as an SI initiative? Are they actually integrating GBV into the strategy and services they offer? Is your company collaborating with campaigns beyond the immediate workplace at all, or not doing anything about gender-based violence? So let's all because gender-based violence, we are all agreeing that it exists. What our companies are actually saying, to soon learn. So now, and then still there, number 2 is marketing. They see it as a marketing strategy, so which we really will not, we don't really want companies to only stop at 6 days of activism. Okay, that one is going down. They are now getting to see that they're integrating GBV into the strategy and services that they offer. And then number 4 still remains that some companies don't see gender-based violence. How many people do we have, Cheryl, now participating?
We have 9 people participating, so we moved up from our 6 to 9. Thank you for the 3 that joined us. Now we have 10. Sound like an auction. Yeah?
Yes, that's nice. Because then we can start seeing from the segmentation within the participants that are here today. And no one yet is actually saying their company recognizes GBV through CSI initiatives.
Which is great. Should I move to the next? I think 11 number. I think I'll move to the next.
So, because these ones are actually helping us get a sense of who is around the room today on this fireplace conversation, and also what are their experiences in terms of GBV in the workplace. And this one seeks for us to understand what's your understanding of GBV in the context of work. So this now becomes to you as someone who engages with the world of work. How do you understand GBV in that world? Do you see it? Do you understand it? Yeah, so are you even seeing it? So can we see how many people do we have now, Cheryl?
And no one's yet voted on this one. So this is a typing one. So you'll be able to.
This is where you have 250 words that you can tell us your understanding of your context of work. So it's, yeah, so please use all the 250 words so that we really get to know what is happening in your context. So there's one already that we can all read. It says, being treated unfairly on the basis that I'm a woman and being violated against. So this person is seeing and experiencing. Very little. I am starting to learn more and more, and shocked to see how it is almost part of the norm. Wow. That is so powerful. Yeah, the other one is see it through the experience or the eyes of, or the lens of sexual crimes. And as you can see, that gender-based violence in the workplace manifests itself differently, and we can already now link back to the story that Mpiwa shared with us, where she shared various stories, but all of them were happening in the world of work. And already from the Menti results, it's very clear that that violence really manifests itself in different ways. There's someone else who's saying any form of violence and harassment that relates to issues of gender in terms of verbal, physical harassment, right up to physical. Gender-based violence in the workplace is any action which individuals are negatively impacted because of the gender associated themselves with. And the other one, GBV, is a challenge in the workplace and sometimes manifest in the forms of, I need to move, I can't see the full. Cheryl, I can't see the full, maybe you can read the site. How does this work? Oh, we learn as we go. Okay, sorry there, I can see now. So we are really now there. How many people do you have, Cheryl?
Gosh, the word for 2020, unmute myself. 9. We have 9 respondents, and there are about 11 people participating.
And we're getting more deeper into now, even hearing what the almost some information sounds like definitions of various forms of gender-based violence now taking place in the workplace. GBV is a challenge in the workplace space, and sometimes it manifests in the form of microaggressions and sexual harassment, and it's power-driven. Sexual harassment and violence against women in the workplace. So this person is seeing it. All workers should work in the workplace free of violence and homophobia. Sexual harassment, bullying, verbal and emotional harassment, rape comments, that sexualizes one. This is an attempt to understand the SGBV dynamics that often subtle and hide as it is the world of work, or sometimes cultural bias as if this is how things are supposed to be. So we see a bit of normalization of violence in the workplace. And you sometimes think, maybe someone else, this is happening too as well. So maybe this is how we work in this place. This is, I think, is the last question on this segment of questions. And are you aware of GBV policies and procedures in your workplace? And yeah, we are at 50-50 for now. And then if Sandile could be getting ready to start to do her own inputs once we end flighting this question. And it's very interesting what we're saying. Oh, this 67, 33%, I think it's the second time we're getting it today.
Yeah.
Are we having any more people coming in? Yes, now it's checking.
I'll just wait for 2 more, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But whatever
Yes.
device you're looking at, as each session ends, keep looking at your phone. I'll keep changing. I'll keep adding a new question. So keep engaging us on this, although we might not always flight it on the Zoom screen.
Yes, I think we wanted to ensure that everyone can use the menti.com app, and also everyone feels almost comfortable with using it. That's why we've ran 4 questions repeatedly. So at this stage, we are sitting at 56 and 44 on the awareness of policies and procedures in the workplace. And we have 9 participants. Are we? Yes, so I'm going to ask Sandile Ndelu, who is a South African Black trans feminist writer and a speaker, a lawyer, to discuss the issues related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and youth. And Sandile, over to you.
Thank you, Skro. And thank you, Womaniko, for pioneering the space where we can come together and bring our minds together and try and think through some of these issues. I think it was very helpful the way in which Ricky introduced the topic today was really helpful. This idea that the home space in many ways oftentimes spills over into the workplace. And I think one of the reasons for this is also because we also spend a considerable amount of time within the workspace, right? In a context where there isn't COVID-19 and we aren't working from home and we're working in offices and various places of work, we spend approximately in the region of 8 hours with a whole sort of different ecosystem of people. That's almost the same amount of time that we spend awake at home. And so it's an incredibly, so the workplace is an incredibly important space in which to investigate and query the question of sexual and gender-based violence. Because in effect, we're exposed to various forms of gender-based violence within the workplace because we're often physically there, and if we're not physically there, we're there in other ways. We may be there psychologically, we may be there, you know, in various other permutations. And in essence, and I think Ricky mentioned this, is that, you know, the workplace is a microcosm of society. The same people who are at home, you know, who are offenders within the home space are also the same people who are our colleagues at work. And I think we also sort of have to start making these connections, that there isn't sort of this clean separation between the people who are committing sexual and gender-based violence within the home or within public. These are the same people who are also within our midst when we're at work. These are the same people who, as I think Ricky also mentioned, who we travel with when we're going to work. It's the same people in the taxis, it's the same people in the train, in the bus, but it's also this, you know, maybe the person who's in the office next to you, maybe the person that you encounter at the coffee stand or at the printing machine. But I do think there are some differences between the working environment and the home environment, or sort of the public environment, right? And I think the main difference for me with the workplace environment is that there's this additional sort of layer of a duty of care that is placed directly on workplaces, on employers, to ensure that they create workplaces and workspaces which are safe and secure as possible. This is a direct obligation. And this is different from the way in which we engage with one another, where the obligation is, I think in legalistic terms, it could be termed as a negative obligation. Your responsibility is not to do something, not to commit sexual and gender-based violence, whereas within the workplace, your employer has a positive duty to put in mechanisms from, you know, questions around policies, but to also put in place structural and institutional mechanisms to ensure that the workplace is a safe one as possible. But today I want to speak about, I think, two things that are sort of always on my mind when it comes to gender-based violence within the workplace, as somebody who sort of is positioned outside of the dominant systems of cis heteropatriarchy. And for me, the first one is the conversation around how we think about violence, how we define violence, how we categorize violence. And I think it's not controversial to posit that by and large, we understand violence sort of sort of the popular sense as something that takes place primarily against women who are cisgender and heterosexual, who also understand gender-based violence, or commonly understand gender-based violence as something that also is something that's primarily sort of physical or psychological or financial, but there's a whole different, I think, further range of manifestations of violence that I think we also have to look at if we're really serious about turning the tide of gender-based violence within the workplace. And one of the ways I think we can do this is to extend the definition of violence to one that takes account of the violence that we experience at the hands of institutions and organizations. And I think this also squares quite nicely with the theme of today's discussion, which is Dare to See Us. And so I think we have to have more conversations about the violence of having to conform to particular gendered stereotypes. For example, I work within the legal space, and there are sort of tacit rules about how people should present themselves, particularly when you're in front of an institutional or an official body like a court. Many of them are incredibly patriarchal and incredibly regressive in many ways. If we think of the violence of, for example, when it comes to trans people, of not having a gender, of not feeling that there's a bathroom, something as simple as, a bathroom that you can use within the workplace. That is an incredible type of violence which is inflicted on people. The violence of being dead named, again, in the case of trans people, the violence of not seeing the type of violence that you experience, your sort of own sense of experience of violence reflected within policies, reflected within institutional practices, is also a form of violence. That sort of invisibilization can within itself also be a type of violence. The violence of feeling like, as trans and queer people, as lesbian women, as trans women, feeling as if when conversations about gender-based violence are happening within the workplace, the type of violences that we experience and the way in which we experience violence is sort of added as an afterthought, or sort of, a sprinkling, with the intention of sort of wanting to seem intersectional or inclusive or diverse, can also, I think, within itself be a type of violence that I think we have to talk about, and I think we have to include within our framing and our understanding of what gender-based violence looks like.
Can you put your video off?
Sure. Is it better now?
Yes, much better. And in closing, yes.
Great. And so I think another one of the participants made a mention of this on the Mentimeter about the microaggressions. I think particularly again, microaggressions against Black women, right? I remember when I was still starting my career, I was working as an intern, and I had the director of an organization. And let me just pause and perhaps let you understand the gravity of being an intern within a big organization and having, sort of the top person, the top boss, who by the way was a woman, the top boss in the institution, tell me that I was quote unquote inappropriately dressed, and sort of commenting on my body, giving me unsolicited advice about what type of clothing I should wear, which would be more appropriate, not only for the workplace, but also for my body type. And this type of violence, right? And it's in many ways also an epistemic violence. I think also has to fall within the frames of understandings that we employ when we talk about sexual and gender-based violence within the workplace. I think the same can be said when it comes to women's hair, right? This is an age-old conversation, right? Just a few weeks ago, we had the clicks debacle about Black women's hair. And those sort of eruptions or ruptures aren't necessarily isolated events. That is, particular types of violences that particularly Black women are facing within the workplace on a day-to-day basis. These various expectations that are in place, patriarchal expectations that are in place to discipline, to regulate our bodies, and to limit our ability to participate as equal members of society. And I think in the context of workplaces, our ability to participate as equal members of workplaces. So that's the first thing I wanted to speak about, which was really around thinking about how we can ensure that we stretch the definition of gender-based violence as far as possible, so that all of these iterations of violence don't fall through the cracks, and that they're always surfaced for us so that we can always identify them and resist. The other issue that I wanted to speak about, and this speaks to the question of, what are the practical things that we could do to protect ourselves and others and advocate for safety within the workplace. I'm a big proponent of, particularly within the workplace, I'm a big proponent of gossip as a coping mechanism, right? And of course, gossip not in sort of I think in many ways it sort of has a bad rap, because I think it's almost always thought of as something that is malicious. But I do think that sort of the act of convening separately as women and as other folks who find themselves being victimized by patriarchal institutions, sort of coming together and discussing the issues, coming together, warning one another if there's a predator within the organization, warning one another that that person is a predator, for example. And I think that this sort of mobilization through gossip or through sort of coming together outside of the institutions that are put in place by our workplaces also assists us with mobilizing and building building power amongst ourselves as workers and as employees within our various organizations. And so essentially that's my second point, which is really about how can we sort of intervene and how can we ensure that we are our sisters' keepers at all time. And my solution to that is gossip. It's something that has really worked for me. I've been able to sort of go off the record to comrades or to colleagues within an organization and say, I'm having this problem. Can I get your support in this way? Can we raise it in this, in the upcoming staff meeting, for example, and knowing that there's somebody else who identifies with that struggle and with that particular type of violence, who can sort of be at my side when I'm raising it, or who can raise the issue on my behalf, has been something that's been incredibly empowering for me. Thank you, Sipho.
Thank you, Sandile. And I'm liking the fact that you are already giving out solutions from the context that you have built, because we really are also looking forward to solutions. I'm going to just remind people about Mentimeter. We are no longer going to be flighting the questions, but Cheryl is going to be sending questions on your devices, and you can engage with those questions as we continue. Towards the end, Ulrich is going to come back in and actually give us an overview of both what has been happening on the chart and also what has been happening when it comes to Mentimeter as a point of our discussion, so that we keep on engaging with our speakers. Right now, I'm going to allow Ujabu to come in, and Ujabu is going to share with us from a perspective of experience working as an intern in one of the well-known companies in South Africa. She is speaking on her own experience, and she's also a young woman and an employee of Womaniko. Jabu, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Most definitely not Tembela. Jabulile is my name. And as Usko has said, I am going to be speaking on my experiences as an intern. And I am currently an employee of Womaniko. So I'd firstly like to express my gratitude. It's honestly just a blessing, really, to be sitting on this panel and to be speaking of my experiences as an intern. Even though I had to be convinced by my colleagues at Womaniko. Today I really want to speak on a form of violence that
at a different church. The very first.
Okay.
Sorry, Jabu.
Okay. So I really want to touch on a form of violence that I believe is prevalent in most work institutions. At no point did I ever think that I would be a victim of that form of violence. And I believe that it's a form of violence that's not easy to prove, because there are no physical outward scars that you can show to people. I think we've seen on social media, we've seen on the news, we've seen in our own communities, in our own homes, how people want to see proof when one has been violated against. People want to see scars, and without scars, you basically don't have a case, or you're lying, you're overreacting. And I think as an intern as someone who interned rather at one of the biggest entertainment companies, not even in South Africa, but in Africa, I know when I told people of the things that I encountered at that specific company, people were like, people couldn't believe it. They just couldn't believe it. And the unfortunate part is that I don't have any physical scars to display, but they are there. And I really want to, yes, that form of violence is emotional, it is psychological, and it is verbal. I remember when I got a call rather to come in for an interview. I was over the moon, because I thought, oh my gosh, such a big company. This is going to look good on my CV. It was, for me, it represented the beginning of something new. And I was looking forward to it. And little did I know that I was in for one hell of a ride. So the first problem that I encountered was that the job, when I went for I think it was the second round of interviews, the job was not what it was advertised as. And I remember I texted my mom during the interview while I was waiting for my turn to go in, and I said, listen, I think I was called in for something that was not advertised. And we had agreed, okay, fine, you're there now, so just go for the interview and basically leave it to God, and we'll see how that goes. And that's what we did. And so eventually I got the job, and I was ecstatic. We've all seen the stats of unemployment in South Africa. So I was happy that 2 weeks after completing my honors, I didn't have to sit at home and go through the whole job hunting process. So really, I was really excited. And I went through training, and it's funny because I think of it now, and I think of how much the statement was emphasized in training. They kept saying it's not about you, it's about the customer. Don't take it personally. And only now does it make sense that these people, they knew the mess that we were walking into, basically, and at no point did they feel to let us know beforehand. When we moved to the floor, as we call it, and that's when we officially start working and engaging with customers, that's when everything just took a left. I interact with customers every single day, quite a lot, and I remember there was the first time I received an insult from a customer who was really unhappy with the service that they had been provided with, and they were unhappy with the company. And they said something along the lines of, you're going to lose your job, you're going to end up like the many South Africans who sell avocados on the side of the street. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's, a bit too dramatic, but okay. And as the insults came, at first, it was water off a duck's back. And I thought, yeah, no, I can do this. It's not about me, because that's what we were told in training. It's not about you. It's about the customer. Don't take it personally. And I remember then my first foot tech came in, and I thought, oh, okay, well, that's not about the company. That's a bit too personal. And then I spoke to a colleague of mine at the time, and she said she had been referred to as, excuse my French, a black bitch. And I thought, well, that's not about the company. That's rather personal. And often when we'd flag, and I mean, so many other insulting, offensive messages and complaints would come through. And when we'd flag these to our supervisors, again, it's not about you, it's about the customer. And I thought, well, how do you expect me to perform at my best, to give my best, to make sure that I meet my KPIs, that I meet my targets, yet this is how I'm being treated? And obviously, such things take a toll on a person. I'd walk into, as soon as I got to the door, my mood would just change. It would just change. And that would, for me, that just signified how toxic that environment was. And honestly, for me, it just highlighted the blatant disregard for employees. And it was so funny because you'd see how this company campaigns for, the fight against GBV, how we're against violence, yet all the employees are excluded from this fight. Another issue that really, I don't know, I think for me, it's what really broke the camel's back was, I remember during training, at no point was I notified that I'd be working a shift that ended at 11 p.m. Only when I had gotten the job, I'd signed the contract, I'd gotten the job, and I started working, was I notified that you are going to be working a shift that ends at 11 p.m. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't ask my parents to pick me up, because I mean, they have work early in the morning. So that's just out of the question. And I can't afford a car. So that, again, is out of the question, which obviously meant that I had to use e-hailing services. We've all seen the hashtags. We've all seen people complaining about Uber, about Bolt, and etc. on social media. And one hashtag that really stood out for me was hashtag Taxify and Die. And so when I would come off my shift at 11 o'clock, that's what was going through my head. What if today is hashtag Taxify and Die for me? And having to Uber at 11 p.m. put me in such an awkward position, because I had to find a friend who was awake so that I could call the friend until I got home. So here I am on a 30-minute call with someone who should be asleep or who should be doing whatever. And I'm basically informing them of, okay, friend, we've just stopped at a robot. I'm okay. I'm 5 minutes away from home. Also, so that the driver could know that should he try anything, there is someone who is aware of my whereabouts. We were notified, or well, we were told that there was a shuttle that would be available. And the more we probed and we asked, where is the shuttle? Where does it stop? How do you, what are the logistics? We found out that the shuttle is actually a taxi driver who comes at 11 to pick up people who are going to a central location, which is Joburg CBD, which is in the opposite direction. So I guess when I talk to my friends, we say we were sold dreams. The job title was quite fancy. Everything we were told seemed so exciting. And when we got there, it was just the complete opposite. It was the complete opposite. I remember as well, we had to, well, work overtime. We didn't have to work overtime, but there was the option of working overtime. And I remember I got an email once that said, you can work overtime, but just note that you will not be paid for lunch. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's a bit odd because that wasn't the case a few weeks ago. And then when we asked questions, they said, oh, no, you can take your lunch, you're just not going to get paid for lunch. So, okay, that's awkward. So you're encouraging me to take the lunch that I'm not going to get paid for. And for me, it just felt as if it was this company basically trying to cover its back. So should anyone want to take this further, then they were basically covered because they didn't say you can't take your lunch. So I remember when I decided I can't do this anymore, and I notified them that I was resigning, and even then I'd resigned with immediate effect because I just could not take it anymore. They were so quick to ask, is it someone on the floor who's harassing you? Is it your supervisor? And at no point did it dawn on them that they were the problem, which for me speaks volumes, really. And I think it's so easy for companies, for people to point fingers at other people, but what are you doing as a company? You know, it's so easy to look for someone on the floor who's supposedly harassing me, but you don't think to look internally. What are we doing as a company to make sure that these interns on board in the right manner? What are we doing as a company to make sure that our interns travel safely to and from work? And I remember when I sent in my resignation letter, someone said, "Oh my gosh, I've never seen someone so happy when they resign." I said, "What do you mean? I can't do this anymore," you know? And I felt at peace, at peace. I wasn't worried about how I'm going to get paid, about what I'm going to do next. I was just so happy to get out of that toxic environment. And I guess it was the best decision that I've ever made, really. I also remember telling someone that someone was saying to me, but you need the experience. You've just graduated, you need experience, you need a job, you need A, B, and C. And I asked, I'm like, so what expense should this experience come at? I can't come into a company a happy person, someone who's whole, and someone who's excited, and walk out and I'm suffering from so many different things. You know, I know it's not as black and white as I'm putting it out to be, but I cannot walk into a company and have my growth stamped and work for a company that blatantly disregards its employees. Sorry, so that's my experience with violence in the workplace.
Wow. Thank you, Jabu. I think you've kind of made all of us see this invisible scar that you started off with. And the more you are telling your story, the more we are getting into seeing the invisible scar that we're talking about. And as someone who also does work as a wellness practitioner in the workplace, I think that becomes what we miss. That is what policies sometimes miss. That is what practice sometimes miss, the invisible scars of people walking around in the workplace. And we ask ourselves when someone says, I'm resigning, and they see a happy person resigning, this is the last thing you have, it's yourself. So you're saying this space is not good for me, it's not good for my well-being, so I'm taking myself out of it, poverty or no poverty. And I don't think women in the workplace should be made to decide whether they go on poverty or they stay and be violated. And as we move on to the next segment, I'm going to ask Nishani and Commissioner Kabinde to actually, in their inputs, now look at all the reflect back on the 3 inputs that have happened, and also on the survey results of Menti, and incorporate those into your inputs, so that we kind of now are going to a space of we are hearing, so what are the possible solutions? Because between the two of you, your experiences and your positioning comes with the influence of knowing what works and what doesn't work. And also you are also have experience of practicing some of these things, but you also have the experience of seeing what could be possible, because the pictures that have been painted from a perspective of migrant and race and women in the workplace, the picture that has been painted from a perspective of gender identity, sexual orientation, and expressions in the workplace, and also an experience of a young woman who is still full of dreams. She even says with her friends, they say, these people sold us our dreams. So how do you then, in this very important matter that happens in the world of work, that then makes women to stay in precarious positions, how do you advise us based on your experience going forward? And I'm going to ask you to do that in your responses, in your inputs, so that we start now opening up and responding to what we are hearing and what we've been listening to. And so I'm going to ask Nishani to go first and give us her input from her. Nishani, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah?
Yes, very well.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to start by saying it's been really informative, and I want to speak about something that I want to term institutional rape, because that's what it felt like to me. Felt like rape, felt like I had been used, discarded on the roadside after my tasks had been done, and that I had been left without any willpower to carry on, without any real scars, because it was a system of power. And I'm speaking not just about positional power. Power can be differentiated into three spaces, which is the visible power, which may be positional, hidden power, and invisible power. I also want to challenge the forum tonight to say that, you know, patriarchy is a system. I have experienced violence by the hands of invisible power, which could have been, which were women. Because you see, we call it in the workplace, we just term it, as you get older, we term it politics, but actually it's invisible power, hidden agendas, all entwined in the seduction of racism, of not being a certain caliber of person or skin color of person to be able to sit in forums or to be allowed certain spaces to have a voice. And what happens when a person goes through something like this, it's exactly what happens to a rape victim. You have loss of identity. You start losing ownership in your workspace on work that is, you know, that is primarily yours to deliver. And what happens is then you slowly start fading as a voice that just becomes more and more silent. And the reason some of the barriers to reporting, would have been that firstly, it's your livelihood and it's a fear aspect that happens. The other thing is that we have a space where, you know, when it's reported and when something's happened, and I've seen this through the many years in the workplace, when something is reported, it's usually swept under the carpet with something called a non-disclosure agreement and a payout. And for me, that just doesn't work, because as much as you can't throw money at the situation, because a woman's life is impacted, and it has happened to me more than once, where you've had to kind of, to keep the peace, and you don't have the ability to fight the system, you know? And so you tend to just, you know, keep quiet, keep the peace. Let me just survive this. Let me survive this so that I can live and so that I can feed my children. And it's exactly what happens in a rape situation. And so those are the kind of invisible scars, the invisible things that happen that are affecting our economy, because it puts you on a back foot in terms of your career. And sometimes I've had to restart several times over the years, because I've chosen to speak up or I've chosen to buck the system. And you know, it's very easy to say, well, we must speak up, well, we must report this, well, we must collect evidence. I've got evidence, but I'm not prepared to speak up because I know what's going to come. I know that there is no, you know, I'm probably going to lose my job and you know, have to sign a non-disclosure, and I'm not prepared to do that because my livelihood is at stake. We speak about organizations in a way that, you know, we have these work groups, racism work groups, colonialism work groups, and then we expect victims to hold the responsibility of changing the system. This is a leadership responsibility. It is not the responsibility. We have these work groups of people who are affected. Just say it's a racism or a gender-based violence work group that comes up in the organization. You have this work group, and so victims and traumatized people must volunteer more time to change the system. People who are impacted by this violence, be it visible or hidden or invisible, must now put themselves on the line and face fear of losing a job or face fear of discrimination or whatever fear that might be. And so it's not that simple to speak truth to power. It's not that easy to do so. And some of the things that I want to say as best practices, and this is something that we've been doing globally, is, you know, you've got to understand that there needs to be policies. This is not something that can be dealt with in the HR space. We need a strategy, we need a framework, we need policies, we need procedures. And when I speak about policies, I'm speaking about a policy specifically named prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse in the workplace. I don't think we have that. We have a sexual harassment policy or a disciplinary policy. We don't have, what is the prevention and sexual exploitation and abuse in the workplace look like? What does digital safety in the workplace look like? Because now we've moved our workspaces to a digital forum. So how do we know that there's not mob digital you know, harassment going on? What are some of the things we are going to be doing? If we are touching sides with children in any way or form, how are we safeguarding those children, both digitally as well as with our behaviors? And you know, the reason that we have policies and that we need policies is that it needs to be something that leadership and management or the head of organizations actually buy into, that they actually put into the strategy, that there is a framework from the leadership team, and that there's resources and money put behind this. And I can tell you why we need resources and money, because following the policies, we need an implementation processes, we need procedures, but also we need reporting mechanisms, because oftentimes we're told report to who? Report how? What? So I go to my HR person, but maybe I don't really trust my HR person. Maybe I feel the HR person has the organization's best interests at heart. Maybe I'm not safe with the HR person. So do we have reporting mechanisms in place that are accessible, that make it easy for people to remain anonymous if they needed to remain anonymous? Because the subject of concern, you know, it's important that we believe them. Sorry, is there something? Can you hear me? Okay, great. It's important that we believe the subject of concern. And once we've had a reporting, I mean, how do we then, you know, is it through whistleblowing? Is it through hotlines? Once we've had the reporting and we're starting to do investigations, and investigations should be external. It shouldn't be the organization investigating the organization, because let's face it, what will come of that and how fair could that investigation be for the victim, especially if the perpetrator is somebody in power? And I say somebody because that is not gender-based. And then what kind of survivor support can we offer as organizations for the subject of concern? Can we remove the person from a bullying situation or from a toxic situation where a person is feeling unsafe? And when I speak of unsafe, I don't just mean physically, but psychologically and emotionally. Is the person safe to be able to do their work as well? Because we need to look at violence in all these spheres when we talk about this. And again, we look at sort of, without doing this, what is the risk to the organization? Because what happens is that, you know, I fully respect that we need to look out for each other and warn each other, but warning each other is going to perpetuate the situation. The perpetrator still remains there. And one of the things that we need to do in terms of the investigations is, once we've come past this, is what kind of criminal accountability do we have? I mean, do we go after somebody who's been, once an investigation is done and a case is held in an organization, do we go after somebody who, with a criminal accountability? Do we lodge this through our system? And also, do we, oftentimes what happens is a perpetrator in the middle of something then just resigns because the heat gets too much or whatever it is. And I'm saying we need to go after them even after they resign, that it would still need to be something that they need to be held accountable for. And then, why not put a system in place? It is your organization. Why not put a system in place where we dock salaries and we provide victim support, whatever that victim support might be? Because we can talk about this, but if we don't have measures in place, and if we don't have procedures and policies in place, and as much as that sounds quite boring per se, but if for the person who doesn't have the voice at the table, for the person who's at a lower grade, who might need to speak truth to power at a much higher level, these policies protect those people. These procedures protect those people and give a voice to that space. And also, once we've done that, we've got to create learning. We've got to create awareness. We've got to create, and learning is not the magic wand. Courageous leadership is. But if we don't have the learning in the space, how on earth are we supposed to link sexual crimes into the workplace? Example, does your code of conduct cover sexual misconduct or bullying or making the workplace unsafe in any way? Does it cover that? Are people signing a code of conduct that is actually relevant and that can hold them accountable? As part of our induction, are we doing a proper prevention of safeguarding? Are we making sure of prevention of sexual acts and violence? Are we making sure that people understand what that means? Are we understanding what that would mean as an organization? So it's about bringing people onto a level that there is no excuse. There should be no excuse, but it's providing that framework and providing the platform in which to do this. And that is something, that I work in. So I understand there are still barriers to reporting, even with all these measures in place. There are still barriers to reporting. People are still afraid. But at least if we are able to start having this framework and we see leadership buy-in and people are talking about it and there's posters up and maybe there's an anonymous post box somewhere. And, one of the things that I found is that identifying something called focal points, which would be people who are trusted in the organization, where a person who feels violated in any way can go and have a conversation with somebody called a focal point, who is a champion in the organization, who then gets a specialized training and kind of support. And that person will be able then to be the link between the subject of concern and the alleged perpetrator, and an investigation that can then take place. But it's about having these measures in place, because what do? We usually go to a friend and we chat about it, and then we go, unless we go through a formal grievance HR process, which is actually, I believe, not the avenue that we should be taking, that there should be a completely separate GBV space in every organization. And kind of that is me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Nishani. Thank you so much. My apologies, my internet is very disruptive. But what you have done is you've actually now incorporated what we've been hearing, plus, and then put it intertwined with your own experience. And you've been even giving us now frameworks of what we could be doing and ideas of what could we be doing, which fits in very well into the next segment, where we get Commissioner Kabinde to actually say, from a perspective where then now some of the things that you have mentioned or now could become part of the guidelines going forward, because you are really have spoken from a place of practice and a place of knowing what works and what doesn't work. So thank you so much for your contributions. And I'm going to then invite Commissioner Kabinde to come in and actually speak from a perspective of the guidelines, and also what should we expect and what could we see going forward. And you've heard, Commissioner, you've heard from stories of experience, observed and felt, and you've also heard from the Mentimeter what people are experiencing in the workplace. So you kind of now in your inputs kind of put everything together and start speaking to all the segments of issues that you've had. So I hand over to you, and thank you for gracing us.
Thank you very much, Madam Facilitator. I'm struggling on how to integrate all of this. So what I've done is, as part of my presentation, I'm going to start by addressing some of the issues that have come up, that were raised, just to deal with that directly. And then I'll go into the ILO convention and the code itself as a tool that seeks to deal with issues of gender-based violence in the world of work. So I'll start off by just giving some of my reactions to some of the stories that we've heard, and to share what the law says, and in some cases what policy tools are saying to us. I want to start off by saying that the new code, which is on the table, the amended code of good practice on on the prevention and elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work, is really just that. It is a code, it is a guideline, and we are encouraging employers to embrace it in dealing with issues of violence and harassment in the world of work. And you know, if you look at the code, even the 2005 code, a lot of the stuff that we have in the new draft code was already there. But our experience is that employers have been slow to take up the code and to implement it in their organization. For example, you find that a lot of organizations don't have a policy, a basic policy on violence and harassment, or on dealing with sexual harassment in the workplace. Need I remind you about a political party that where there was a case of sexual harassment that was laid, and it was thrown out with a statement that says there was no sexual harassment. And now the question for us as commissioners was, this political party doesn't even have a policy, on sexual harassment and gender-based violence. So what are they using as their definition of sexual harassment? Because in the organization, you'd have to have a definition, and that is what you would use as a test. And those are some of the things that the code seeks to address. Just in terms of my experience with gender-based violence in the world of work, employers can very easily pass incidences of gender-based violence off. And one of the comments that you hear, or one of the cop-out positions, are things like, this did not take place on our premises. And we know that a lot of the incidences don't always take place at the workplace itself. And now, with the new normal, we know that most of us work from home. And therefore, this cop-out position tends to be perpetuated. But what I like about the LOC 190 is that it moves from talking about workplace, which is often defined as a physical space where work is taking place, that is normally the office, to expanding it to what a new definition that is called the world of work. And based on that, it would cover the informal sector, it would cover your domestic workers, it would cover some of the stories that Jabu spoke about, the examples that she gave about traveling to work, and the responsibility of an employer to ensure the safety of employees while traveling to work. It would cover the employer's response to domestic violence, because when an employee comes to work and it is clear that they're experiencing domestic violence, it has an impact on productivity, and therefore employers cannot afford to continue to turn a blind eye to those. And so the question is, how does the employer then support employees who are going through such. So this definition that is covered in C190 of the ILO really is fantastic as far as we're concerned as a commission, because it broadens the scope of what is a workplace by defining it as the world of work, and it just is more far reaching than the initial definition. There was also talk about cyberbullying and how the use of technology has become quite prevalent with the new world of work, and how it can be used to violate and to harass employees. And we've just had an example in this session of people that have come in and violated us and harassed us because they don't agree with our agenda. You know, cyberbullying is a reality, and employers cannot remain oblivious to that reality. So what I love about C190 is that, unlike previous interventions, it talks to issues of cyberbullying, and the draft code that is in place also addresses that. The other thing is that, it has been said that gender-based violence is a matter of power, and Narishi spoke about different forms of power, which was really, very eye-opening. And the thing is, when there is somebody who's in a position of power, there's somebody who is in a position of powerlessness and somebody who lacks agency. So what we find, if we talk about experiences in the world of work, is that a lot of these cases go unreported, because ultimately people think of bread and butter issues, and then have to decide what they can do, what's more important, having this case reported or ensuring that there's food on the table for the family. So what we're trying to do with the new draft code is to expand the people that can report. And we're saying it's not only the person who is exposed to the gender-based violence who has the power to report, it is also extended to those who are watching. People who have witnessed it can also report this, and it can be dealt with. It can at times be normalized, gender-based violence in organizations, and what we're finding is that it becomes the norm. And I think Jabu spoke to some of the things that were happening, and one realizes that to a large extent, a lot of the things were being normalized. The violence that was perpetrated against employees by clients was normalized by the employer. And I'll talk to Section 60 of the Employment Equity Act and how it seeks to address the employer's liability in these cases, and how it's then translated in the code as being very specific as to what the employer should do to deal, to eliminate, to prevent, and to ensure that they create awareness of the rights of employees in the world of work. So there was also talk about foreign nationals and the protection of foreign nationals and the abuse of foreign nationals because for some reason they're viewed as having no rights. And I think it is important for us to remember this. When you take a foreign national, whether they're documented or not, and you employ them, automatically that foreign national is protected by all employment laws of the country. So immediately, this foreign national has all the rights that a South African citizen would have in the world of work. And we need to be communicating this more. We need to be creating the awareness for people to know, because this abuse and the fact that people are ignorant is being used by employers not to deal with cases. So the minute a person is employed, they're protected by all laws of employment. The Employment Equity Act treats sexual harassment as a form of unfair discrimination, and it recognizes that such conduct poses a barrier to the achievement of substantive equality in the workplace. So it is much broader. And the minute you look at it as unfair discrimination, it immediately places certain responsibilities on the employer. And these are some of the responsibilities and the liabilities that we are using the amended code to deal with, to bring to the fore, and to create quite a clear distinction and clear boundaries of the responsibility of the employer. So Section 60 of the Employment Equity Act says that where an employee is engaging in any conduct that contravenes the Employment Equity Act, the conduct must immediately be brought to the attention of the employer. And this obviously can be done by either the person who's experiencing this or other people who witness this. And then what Section 60 says is that the employer must, not may, the employer must take the necessary steps to eliminate the alleged conduct and to comply with the provisions of the Act. If the employer does not take the necessary steps to eliminate the alleged conduct, the employer is deemed to have perpetrated the conduct themselves and will, as such, be liable to the victim. And this is quite important to understand because often employers are told about what is happening and they do nothing. And we as employees then sort of like shrug our shoulders and say, what can we do? Our employer is not doing anything. But what the law says is that the employer has a responsibility. And if they don't do anything about this, they're liable. They can be viewed as being responsible for the act themselves. So it is quite important for us to understand that and to continue to communicate this over and over again. One of the things that the Commission is trying to do is to really create more workplace activists who have knowledge and who can share and spread these news so that people don't remain ignorant and don't stay in their position of being victims whilst the employer is getting away scot-free with certain responsibilities that are in the law. There was also a comment about reporting and also the issue of anonymity. And I need to emphasize that the new code is quite specific. There is a difference between confidentiality and anonymity. So the law says, and the code itself says, matters of this nature are sensitive matters, and therefore all there should be a responsibility on everyone that is involved to ensure that the matter is dealt with confidentiality. However, the case cannot remain anonymous, and I'll tell you why. Because if you are accusing me of harassment or sexual violation, I have a right to know who is making the allegations so that I can then defend myself. So the law has both sides to it. It protects the person who is a victim in this situation, and it also protects the perpetrator because on the other hand, we can have people who willy-nilly make certain allegations and because of this rule of anonymity don't have the responsibility to clarify or to put the case across with facts. Employers will have criminal accountability and so will perpetrators. They will have criminal accountability. So it doesn't matter that a person resigns from their workplace. Those who have experienced sexual harassment or violation of any form still has other acts, other legislation that protects them. PEPUDA is one of them that would protect them, and OSHA would also protect employees that have been victimized in whichever way. And so one can pursue the case beyond the employment of the person that is the alleged perpetrator. So this was my way of just quickly dealing with some of the issues that came up. And I'll just very quickly go and share what the code says and some of the key elements that we need to remember around the current draft code so that we would be able to be empowered and we would be able to deal with the issues as and when they come and to assist others in doing so. So let me start off by sharing what the objectives of the draft code on violence and harassment is. So we are seeking to align the code with ILO Convention 190. You will remember that there's currently a code that deals with sexual harassment and violence in the workplace, the 2005 code. But with the adoption of the ILO Convention 190 in June 2019, there were new developments and new things that some of which I've shared that came in and that required that we ensure that our policy tools are aligned, and thus the need for us to amend. What the draft code also does is that it creates a framework for interpretation and implementation of the Employment Equity Act. Remember that the Act itself hardly speaks about concepts such as sexual harassment, sexual violation. So what the code does is that it takes those concepts and it contextualizes them and puts them in such a way that it is understandable for the public in terms of what the rights are in terms of the Employment Equity Act. The code also provides guidelines to employers, to employees as well, to employer organizations, as well as to trade unions on how to deal with violence and harassment in the world of work. And it also, something that we've spoken about tonight, is that it also assists employers in drafting policies for themselves around violence and harassment in the world of work. So, compared to the 2005 code, these are some of the things that are new in the draft code that were not included. Whereas the 2005 code dealt primarily with sexual violence and harassment, the draft code is broader. It goes to dealing with more issues than just sexual violence and harassment. It also deals with racial, ethnic, and social origin violence and harassment. It also deals with workplace bullying, which is something that was never dealt with in the code, in the previous code. And workplace bullying was perpetuated because there wasn't a legal framework that could be used to assist employees that are being bullied. And we know that if one were to go to psychiatric hospitals, there are a lot of people that are there and that are suffering as a result of workplace bullying, you know, where employers and managers, supervisors bully people to an extent that their mental health is compromised. So what this code does is that it gives tools for employers to deal with issues of workplace bullying. And then it also deals with violence and harassment related to protected disclosure. So what happens if a person discloses certain things, which is something that often lead to cases not being reported. What happens when I report a case? Am I protected by the law from victimization in the world of work? And what is so powerful about the draft code is that it talks to these different types of violence and harassment. It talks to their nature, it talks to the impact, and it goes on to give us a test that can be applied when dealing with these cases in helping us arrive at a verdict of whether the person was guilty of such offenses or not. So it's good in that sense. So Section 60, as I've already said, gives employers a legal obligation to proactively and to provide remedial steps to the prevention and elimination of violence and harassment. And therefore, the code also then goes on to deal with management of violence and elimination of violence. And under that are some of the things that I've spoken about already, creating very clear rules and policies and procedures of how we deal with violence and harassment, GBV, in the world of work. And this goes on to an extent where we propose that there should be a standalone policy that deals with this subject matter. So issues of violence and harassment in the workplace should be covered by their own policy, which guides employees into what do I do if the perpetrator is the person that I report to, and I cannot go to that person for assistance. And one of the other things that the code does is that it's very specific and clear that the policies and the procedures should be communicated effectively to all workers. So it doesn't help that we put the information on intranet when we know that there are some of our staff that don't have access to intranet. The employer has a responsibility to make sure that every single employee is aware of these policies and procedures, and it is communicated in a language that they can understand. Um, I also love the Convention 190 in that it speaks of a worker as opposed to employees. And the difference is that when we speak of workers, the scope becomes much broader. It covers even people that are suspended or terminated. So if I have been terminated from my employment and I am trying to get recourse or come into the organization to claim monies that are due to me, and during that time at, of my being back at work to deal with those issues, I get sexually harassed or violated in any way, the draft code would protect me. And so the concept of worker becomes quite critical. The change from employee to worker becomes quite critical because it broadens the scope of people that can be covered. It also covers suppliers, it covers contractors, and it also covers clients, as well as the actions of the clients against employees, as Jabu had already shared with us. The code also goes on to put the responsibility on the employer to adopt preventative measures as well as awareness campaigns. So the employer has to go to great lengths to make sure that their training initiatives, that their communication campaigns, and that the occupational health and safety measures are communicated. And in that, we communicate issues of GBV as well as the violations that we've spoken about. And also how to reduce the risks. What are employers doing to ensure that the risks of GBV are reduced in the world of work? So employers would then look at their environment and look at some of the touch points that makes GBV prevalent. And then they would then have to ask themselves, how are we going to mitigate these risks? There's also a section that deals with treatment, care, and support. And in there, the code suggests that employers must keep record of information that workers can access when they are in trouble. So information around police and how to access police, what are the things that they should do in that situation, information about health and safety, information about appropriate referrals, and assist workers in referring them to the appropriate referrals. Also, programs of treatment, care, and support need to be communicated by employers. They need to come up with a plan of how they're going to support. I spoke earlier about the issue of domestic violence, and this is where it would come in handy, where policies such as these would then be accessible to workers to say, look, I see that this is what is happening, and this, you have these resources available to you to deal with the situation that you're in. And so the code does cover treatment, care, and support. Um, Monitoring and evaluation is also important because employers will never know how effective their policies are and how effective the procedures and processes they have in place are if they are not monitoring and evaluating these. And the code encourages employers to gather and analyze both qualitative and quantitative information and to use this to reflect on the effectiveness of the systems that they have in place as well as the policies. Now, as a way of concluding, I'd just like to share how far we are from getting to a place where the code can be adopted. We have received public comments. You will remember that we opened the code to public comments and we received a lot of comments, and the closing date for public comments was the 21st of October 2020, and we've received all these comments. We've even gone as far as to interrogate the comments and to incorporate them in the code that we had. At this stage, we are busy with legal drafters who are now revising the code to make sure that it is legally compliant to the prescripts of the law. And then in February, we believe we would be able to present this to, to the labor market chamber of NETLEC. And once that is done, we believe by 2022 financial year, the code will be finalized and it will be published for implementation. I think that's all I had to share. And if there's anything that I've left out, I'm willing to deal with it in the question time. Thank you, Sito.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Tabea. It's Ricky, and I'm taking over because we've gotten to the end of our evening. I guess one of the first things I want to say is we really decided in doing the seminar on GBV to try and take a bite out of a huge chunk, just in terms of all the inputs that we've had. This clearly is an issue that is of pandemic proportions. Initially, I called it a plague, and it's not an issue that we have been able to unpack in our 2-hour period. I want to ask everybody on the call, everybody on Facebook, if you can just give us a few more minutes to kind of wind up the discussions we've had and to summarize. The one thing that is clear is even this big bite we took today is not enough. So we are committing at Womaniko and with the Wellness Health Company that we will do another webinar on this issue. There's so many issues that came up. I'm going to try and summarize what some of the issues are and also talk to what we saw in our poll. I said initially that our rape statistics during the month, from the month of July to the month of September, they were 9,000 cases of rape reported in South Africa. I said initially that over 30% of women report exposure to gender-based violence in the workplace. What I didn't say is that the CCMA has less than 350 cases reported. So clearly there is a problem. There is a problem between the incidence of gender-based violence and the actual reporting of gender-based violence. And that's where you come into this policy space. What we saw in the discussions that we had is that there are different levels of vulnerability. Our inputs from Mpiwa, from Sandile, and from Jabu talked about the intersecting layers of vulnerability. And when you are that vulnerable, it becomes difficult to access the systems if those systems are in place at all. Mpiwa, in fact, reminded us of the importance of what happens in terms of retaliation and how retaliation is an impediment to reporting. And then Sandile took us even further. She took us into an explanation of our basic understanding of violence as it is inadequate for the nature and the manifestations of violence that are achieved. Sandile brought us to the place of structural violence, to institutional violence, to epistemic violence. Is how we build allyship, is how we seek out support, is how we warn each other of predators. And then Jabu went even deeper. She talked about the invisible scars. She talked about a toxic work environment. So she talked about when the perpetrator is the institution themselves, or when the perpetrator is an institution that is failing to protect you from its customers, that is denying your humanity because it says you must protect its customers. So we were able to unpack multiple manifestations and experiences of gender-based violence. And as I said, this is just a small chunk. We didn't talk, for example, about how it is experienced in the world of work when you are a differently abled person. We didn't get to so many of these different kinds of intersections and the multiple manifestations that we can experience because of them. Nishani was really helpful in just getting practical about how do you deal with this in a place of work, in the world of work. What are the things that you have to consider as an employer? What are the things that you as an employee should be looking for your employer to have in place? So when we make the judgments, and she talked about very specific measures, from reporting mechanisms to ensuring that there is learning and capacity building, to ensuring that there is policy and there is leadership commitment and there are resources to do this work. And then this brings us to the final input from Commissioner Tabea. And Commissioner, I have to say, I really want to thank you because the commission has done so much work. It has done so much work to respond to what are the current shortages in terms of the responses in the world of work to gender-based violence. And as you can see from our discussions, there are still more places that we can go. There are still more ways to stretch the definitions of gender-based violence. There are still more ways that employees can do more of this work. But it was really amazing to hear of some of the growth that has happened, be it extending the definition of a workplace to now the world of work, be it extending who can report and that it need not only be the victim, be it extending criminal liability and employer liability, and be it ensuring prevention and elimination. That's quite a high standard. But I think some of the reasons that we need to continue to have these conversations is the commissioner was quite clear at the beginning that this is a code, it is a guideline. So it leaves us with questions of how do we make this enforceable? How do we ensure that our workplaces take up these obligations and begin to implement them? And that's where the commissioner came in with, we have to build activism in the workplace context. We have to ensure that within the workplace, they are women with agency who are making demands, who are asking, who are saying, what else can we do? Who are ensuring that they know what standards they can be held to. And in our chat, there were a whole bunch of suggestions about what are the things that can be done. You know, the establishment of frameworks and ensuring that we're making demands of our workplace in line with the codes of good practice. But I think the biggest barrier is South Africa has still not ratified C190, and we haven't gone through the process of domesticating C190. So we still have a way to walk. One of the biggest barriers is this code of good practice has not yet been approved. So I think that, and this is my suggestion, that if we're moving forward, we have to ensure that this ratification takes place. We have to ensure that this code of good practice is approved. And then we have to ensure that our workplace is implemented. It has been such a deep amount of knowledge that we have downloaded today. And in fact, in our discussions in the room, what we see is that the numbers are probably worse than we think. That's what we know more than anything else, right? The rapid poll I mentioned earlier showed that 51% of workplaces do not have sexual harassment policies and procedures. That was taken 2 years ago. But in our poll, over 40% of people were not even aware of gender-based violence policies in their workplace. And more disturbing, 67% of the people in the room had experienced gender-based violence, and 33% had not been confident enough to report. A further 33% had reported and it hadn't been dealt with. That's 66% attrition rate when one has experienced gender-based violence. So we have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. I want to encourage you to keep walking with us. I'm making a promise, Commissioner Tabea, that we are going to call you back. We're going to deepen this discussion because we cannot get these codes approved. We cannot get this ratification without women in the workplace stepping forward to be active in supporting the work. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our amazing panel that stretched our thinking about what gender-based violence is and what are the things we can do, from tips on how to cope as an individual to kind of institutional demands that can be made. So my greatest thanks to Mpiwa, to Sandile, to Jabu, to Nishani, and to Commissioner Tabea. Thank you so much for staying this extra bit of time with us, and thank you so much for journeying with us this year. We will make an announcement on social media on who won our gifting, and we want to encourage you to stick with us. Please stay with us on the Dare to See Us page. hashtag Dare to See Us page. It's on Facebook. Please stay with us as we continue to find ways to ensure that equality of women in the workplaces. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Feel free to put your camera on and do the wave goodbye.
Yes.
Happy
Enjoy
holidays.
the holidays and stay safe.
Well done, Womaniko. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Babs.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Hey, where's my night?
Good night, Ndelu.
Good night. Bye.
Ndikuda Joshua kumatengesa.
Hey, Nosipo. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I finally see you, Shams. Thanks for coming.
Bye. Was that Mandy?
No, that's Shams. She's in the UK. Bye,
Hi,
So.
Wow. Whew, guys.
That was so stressful.
Oh, but
God.
No, but like very good chin. I was so stressed. Oh.
No, but you know what? Honestly, this was a really good session. Huh?
Like trying to get rid of those people, my hands were shaking. Like I was
I was like
I didn't know what to do. I think I took off some people that were like legitimately in the room.
Yeah. But Mpiwa handled it quite well.
Actually, people were so sensible about it. And I think people are used to it. They know like this thing exists. I just like I think the worst thing would have been if we panicked or someone said something